Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Good to be back.
Being here. The year 2019 is upon us, and to mark the first episode of the year Foreign Correspondents in 2019, we are gathered in a very special location. We are in the auditorium of the former Korean Central Intelligence Agency building. And on today's episode of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of foreign journalists and discuss their outlook for inter-Korean relations in 2019 from the very place where the two Koreas first took that initial step toward reconciliation more than 40 years ago. Now, before we go ahead and look at the 2019 inter-Korean relations forecast, let's rewind things back and have a look at what happened in 2018. I'm sure we can all agree that it was a very eventful year, to say the least. So if you could summarize what happened in 2018 in terms of inter-Korean relations, how would you do it?
Well, I would say, it was a historic year in terms of inter-Korean relations. I've been a foreign correspondent here in South Korea now for about 10 years, and while there have been many newsworthy events, big newsworthy events take place over that period of time, I don't think anything compares to the historic developments that took place in 2018. North Korea participating in the Winter Olympics, the 3 summits between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, as well as, of course, the landmark meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim. So these historic developments that have taken place this year, I think, again, they are, I guess, a high point, certainly in my career here.
Definitely. And how would you describe it, Sakabe?
So my impression is this. So when Mr. Moon insisted South Korea should sit in the driver's seat, I was very skeptical about his diplomatic ability. But once he sit in the driver's seat, his car started moving. And this is my impression.
So a pleasant surprise there.
Yes, that's right.
Now, every time there was a major event in terms of inter-Korean relations, there was a whole media frenzy. So would you agree with the notion that the Foreign Media Corps has prioritized coverage of inter-Korean relations to a greater degree than it did in the years past?
Yeah, I think so. During the first inter-Korean summit last year, I think there were more than 2,000 foreign journalists accredited to that. Well, mostly, of course, from Japan and from China, I guess. But also many came from United States, from European countries. I never met so many foreign journalists gathered in one place in South Korea. And of course, South Korea got into the spotlight. So, of course, I would say that it benefited South Korea a lot, and North Korea maybe also.
The media interest here has been unbelievable. I remember being in one of the summit press centers, and it was absolutely packed. And then I went to do some work, and I kept getting interviewed by different foreign media that had come to cover the summits. So much so that I couldn't get any work done. So I decided not to go to the press center the next day. But certainly in answering your question, a lot of new foreign media have come here to South Korea. The Guardian now has a correspondent posted to the capital, Seoul, and also CNN's bureau has expanded to more than, I think, 10 people now. So you do see greater interest on inter-Korean relations and South Korea as a result of the developments of 2018.
And let me just add on, and I'm saying this purely professionally, Asia Times Bureau was always in Japan, but as of this year, or rather as of 2018, set up in South Korea.
And
for the
why
first
was
time
that?
to cover Northeast Asia, because the big story is right here.
That's
We're
right.
ground center for the biggest story in Northeast Asia, arguably in East Asia.
Yeah, we also can see a new Russian bureau opened last year in South Korea. That's Sputnik.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now, last year, the two Koreas embarked on numerous inter-Korean exchanges to promote that spirit of peace and reconciliation. So, of those many events, which would you say was the most significant?
Yeah, so I think railroad inspection, joint inspection is very crucial to North Korean economy and also to South Korean economy. Especially, it was first inspection, so this is very important.
Okay.
I would agree with Sakabe that the railroad inspection and all those railroad things were really important because it's the most substantial thing that happened between the two Koreas. It's the project that has something real behind it. And if it continues to develop, then many sides can benefit, not only South Korea and North Korea, but also Russia and China and the entire Europe.
Yeah, the entire continent that's joined by the railway.
Right.
So, Kabe, in which areas specifically do you think would benefit from this railway project?
Not only a railroad industry, but also infrastructure for communication and also mining companies. So,
mining companies.
Yes, also Japanese companies have strong interest in what is going on in the Korean Peninsula.
Right.
So it takes maybe 10 years or 15 years, I don't know, for Japanese companies to make an investment in North Korea, but it's going to be a hot issue among Japanese businessmen who are working in Korea.
Okay, so speaking of that investment opportunities, on December 14th, Kim Jong-un, an economic policy advisor to President Moon, said that North Korea represents a blue ocean opportunity for South Korea's future economic growth. Stan, do you agree with this notion that North Korea represents a land of economic investment opportunities for South Korea?
I would agree on one hand. Yeah, if things go well with political relations, then maybe we could see some easing of sanctions and resumption of the real economic cooperation between the two countries. And for South Korea, of course, as you have said, it's a blue ocean. It's totally unexplored territory, and South Korean companies can benefit a lot, as well as companies from other countries if they're allowed to get in. As there is a lot of infrastructure to be built, there are lots of things. I would compare the situation with the one when the Soviet Union collapsed. And it's a totally different kind of economy, and there were a lot of opportunities, the banks to be opened, factories to be reoriented, and everything basically. Yeah, it's billions, if not trillions of dollars are there. Just come and take it.
Yeah. I agree with Stan. I think it's really difficult to estimate the value of North Korea's integration economically into the international community. You mentioned the reconnection of the railways being worth $125 billion. If that happens, that's also going to be opening the door to other types of economic integration that are going to be worth many times more than that, including the reconstruction of North Korea's infrastructure, but also the generation of 24 million consumers. So right now you have, a very undeveloped country with a decent-sized population, half the size of South Korea in terms of its population. Imagine all those consumers being able to buy South Korean products, as well as, again, the construction and infrastructure opportunities that will be opening up in North Korea. That will benefit not just South Korea, but also the region. I think maybe it's overestimated the economic benefits that there might be in terms of North Korea exporting goods or exporting, minerals or other things to Europe by rail. That's a long way to go by rail. So I think really the regional economic benefits, again, would be astounding.
All right. Now let's have a look at Kim Jong-un's supposed visit or proposed visit to Seoul, because the Moon Jae-in government has been waiting for that promised visit by Kim Jong-un to Seoul ever since the last inter-Korean summit back in September, but it hasn't occurred in 2018.
김정은 위원장 연내 답방할지는 김정은 위원장의 결단에 달려 있는 문제겠죠. 그것은 조금 더 지켜보도록 하십시다. 김정은 위원장이 연내 답방을 할지 여부는 아직으로서는 알 수는 없습니다.
So in your estimate, when and where do you think this visit will take place?
I've no idea.
No idea.
I couldn't tell you. I mean, who can say?
Yeah.
I think everyone was surprised when it was announced that a Kim would come to Seoul.
나는 문재인 대통령에게 가까운 시일 안에 서울을 방문할 것을 약속했습니다.
As far as we're aware, no North Korean leaders ever visited South Korea. There's some rumors that Kim Il-sung may have come during the Korean War, but it's not really clear. So it will be, again, that'll be a historic opportunity, a historic moment. But of course it does hold risks for him because there will be demonstrations, there will be protests. So he might be secured in the Sheraton Walker Hotel and helicopter to the Blue House or motorcade to the Blue House. He might go down to Jeju-do, which, like Singapore, will be easy to cordon off. But it does hold risks for him. On the other hand, it holds possibilities. He can continue the charm offensive directly to the South Korean people, and that's important for him. So on balance, how does he see it? I don't know. But what we do know is that Moon Jae-in definitely wants it. Moon Jae-in has made very, very clear he wants it. Kim Jong-un knows that. The two have a hotline to communicate with. So why has it not happened? I don't know. It was expected.
Right.
The Blue House expected it, and it hasn't happened.
Right.
So questions are raised.
Right. Now, Andrew, you touched upon the protests, right, about Kim Jong-un coming to Seoul. So amid growing anticipation in December for Kim Jong-un's imminent visit to Seoul, there were numerous protests breaking out in Seoul. From both pro and anti-summit factions, for those people who are opposed to the Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul, what do you think some of their worries are?
I think in terms of violation of human rights, they are strongly against Mr. Kim. So without apologizing for what he did 5 years ago, 6 years ago, so they wanted apologize from Mr. Kim.
So they wanted apology for human rights violations?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
What might be some other reasons for disagreement?
I'd say that the South Korean conservatives, they oppose North Korea just because it exists.
뒤에다 이따만한 핵을 갖다 놓고 난 미안해 그게 무슨 소용 있어요. 우리 눈으로 우리가 그 핵이 없어지거나 어떤 뭐가 바뀌었을 때라면 저 사람이 진정성이 나올 수도 있다 하지만
They would protest in any case, whatever Mr. Kim says or does. That's just their nature. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's something like more than 40% of South Koreans disagree with the rapprochement that's taking place between North and South Korea. And again, as Stan mentioned, I don't think that group really is going to change their stripes over the course of 2018 because of developments that have taken place between the Moon Jae-in administration and Kim Jong-un in North Korea.
Okay. Now let's talk about sanctions, because so far the US hasn't budged. They haven't changed their opinion regarding sanctions on North Korea.
We're not there yet. And until we get there, we must not ease the powerful worldwide sanctions that are in place.
Takabe, do you think the US is asking for too much?
I think denuclearization is composed of two elements.
Okay.
One is will, one is the ability. If you don't have a will to build a nuclear weapon,
so the equipment to build.
But in terms of ability, it is to erase 100% is totally impossible.
Right. Okay, so it's possible to remove the equipment and the wares, but not possible to completely remove the ability to restart if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's right. I think the most serious problem is mutual distrust between North Korea and the United States. So it is not so easy to bridge the gap between the two. So it should be solved by President Moon as a mediator.
Now, despite the sanctions, there have been some progress in terms of Pyongyang-Washington relations in 2018. After a year of exchanging personal insults at each other in 2017.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
그 무엇을 생각했든 간에
그 이상의 결과를 보게 될 것이다.
Trump and Kim Jong-un did a U-turn and they took on a more friendly tone in 2018.
I would like to thank Chairman Kim for his courage and for the steps he has taken.
And I was really being tough, and so was he. And we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love.
Summit might take place. Have hit another impasse recently after the postponement of a high-level meeting between the two sides, which was scheduled to take place in November. Despite the setback, discussions over a second North Korea-U.S. summit continue to take place, with the Trump administration saying the summit is likely to happen sometime in the early months of 2019. So Stan, when and where do you think this second Pyongyang-Washington summit might take place?
Well, I do not see any reasons not to trust Trump's administration on that. It could possibly take place anywhere in the first half of this year. Maybe not January, maybe not February, but I would bet on spring or early summer. Last year, in 2018, they also negotiated for that Singapore summit. It took longer than expected. They wanted to meet in the end of April, then they were talking about the May, and then finally it has moved to June the 12th. Right. So I guess the 3 months, if it happens 3 months later than expected, then it's okay.
Okay. President Trump, on the other hand, has had a more relaxed attitude in regards to the issue.
If it takes long, I don't care. I tell my people I couldn't care how long. As long as there's no testing, as long as there's no nuclear testing.
How will changes to the Pyongyang-Washington relationship impact any chances of signing that peace treaty between the two Koreas?
2018 has just passed, and of course that was the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, which ended with two peace treaties in the east, in Russia, with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1917, and we had the armistice in 1918, then we had the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which formally ended World War I. What actually happened in 1939 and 1941? Both those treaties were abrogated when Nazi Germany invaded first the West and then the East, and the greatest war in history. So that should tell us that a peace treaty may not actually be worth much.
Just a piece of paper.
It's a piece of paper. It doesn't actually, it can be easily torn up or ignored. On the other hand, if we have a peace treaty, that does give Kim Jong-un an excuse to say to his military, look, we have a peace treaty, now we can disarm, we're safe. So there's two ways to look at it. A peace treaty itself may not be worth much, but for Kim Jong-un, it could be a useful tool to move forward the nuclear disarmament process. So that having been said, I think the Americans should be willing to address it. And I think the reason that they haven't addressed it thus far is this sense, this belief, this fear that if they do, they may be required to move American troops out of Korea or even out of the region. I think that's not the case. That's an issue to be decided between Seoul and Washington. So I see no real reason why the Americans shouldn't move forward and at least put a peace treaty on the table.
Okay,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, signing a peace treaty is more a symbolic act. I can make an example, like Russia and Japan still do not have a peace treaty after World War II, but it doesn't, I guess, play such a big role in our bilateral relations.
Although I'm sitting between you two.
You're acting as a good mediator there.
The DMZ is right here.
Right. Now, another important date in terms of inter-Korean relations is Donald Trump's re-election bid for the 2020 presidential election. Now, are North Korea-related issues still a priority for Trump as he gears up for that re-election, do you think?
Well, that's still a little ways away, and there's a lot that can go on in the United States political atmosphere between now and then, as we've seen just recently with the troop pullouts from Syria and from Afghanistan that President Trump ordered against the wishes of his own Secretary of Defense, or I should say former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. So in terms of where U.S.-North Korean relations will figure in Trump's re-election campaign, I think it's kind of difficult to tell right now. There is, however, I think a bit of a concern that it would be some type of issue that the president might try to exploit for his own domestic political benefit, as we've seen happen previously.
Okay, now let's move things over to China. China remains still an important variable in Pyongyang-Washington relations. Beijing recently cut tariffs on a number of goods imported from the U.S. following months of bitter trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. Do you think the easing of trade tensions between China and the U.S. will have a proxy effect on Pyongyang-Washington relations as well?
I think so. But I don't think that China compromised his plan. So Made in China 2025 is a very crucial plan to Chinese economy, because without it, China remain subcontractor of US companies and European companies. So I don't think that this trade issue will be solved soon.
Back in October, reports emerged that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was planning to visit Russia for a meeting with President Vladimir Putin in the near future. If Kim Jong-un does indeed visit Russia, then what might be some points of discussion between the two leaders?
Well, I would think that the main agenda would be economic questions, economic cooperation, as there are three major projects like the trilateral projects involving North Korea and South Korea and Russia. The first one that we have already spoken about is the railroad project. Then the second one is the energy, and the third one is oil pipeline from Russia through North Korean territory to South Korea and possibly to Japan, extending. Basically, it's the only it's the only practical economic cooperation that could be happening between Russia and North Korea right now. As the bilateral trade, if I'm not mistaken, last year it was about $200 million only, or even less than that.
Now, on December 18th, South Korea's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gun said that 2019 will be another very important year for inter-Korean relations, partly because the following year, 2020, we have the US presidential elections and also the South Korean general elections. So do you think 2019 will be a make or break moment for inter-Korean relations?
Well, I think 2018 was the make or break moment for inter-Korean relations, but 2019 I think promises to be perhaps equally as important. We have now the two Koreas as well as the US and North Korea on a new path toward peace and reconciliation. That needs to be maintained. One of the things that really impressed me about the Moon Jae-in policy and strategy toward North Korea was that it wasn't just a one-off. That summit wasn't, the April summit, the first summit, wasn't just a singular symbolic event. What we've seen is a series of exchanges between the two Koreas, including the two follow-up summits, including, of course, the Washington Pyongyang summit. But we've seen a series of other exchanges in areas of sports and culture throughout the year that has maintained that momentum. That has to continue through 2019 if we want to really dial in that peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula that has seen some potential in 2018 but hasn't really gone all the way to fruition.
All right, so time now already for our final question. What is one headline that you wish to write in 2019 with regards to inter-Korean relations?
Japanese abductee return to Japan. This is what I want. Yeah.
That is what you would like to see happen and what you would like to write about. Okay.
For me, very obviously, Kim Jong-un offers exclusive interview to Asia Times.
Aside from that?
What I'd like to see, what we all need to see, which is above and beyond everything we've spoken about today, is progress on denuclearization. If we could see at the next summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, which I think will happen, if we could see them actually agree, signed, stamped and sealed on some actual practical, viable timeline steps that North Korea could take and which America could reciprocate, that would be a pathway to progress, which this year we haven't seen.
Okay, and Stan, your headline for 2019?
Well, I have many variants. All of them are so fantastic. North Korea and the United States sign a free trade agreement. How does this sound?
Sounds good. Okay, and Frank?
Korean War ends, peace treaty signed, sanctions lifted.
All right. Okay, thank you very much for your insight. Thank you for your input. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
At the beginning of each year, many people set their New Year resolutions and work towards making that goal for the rest of the year. For 2019, it is hoped that the two Koreas can work towards the common goal of peace on the Korean Peninsula. And we at Foreign Correspondents will continue to endeavor to bring you timely and useful information. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.